What people call masters of the waveform is not a hidden race, a council behind a curtain, or literal beings pulling levers from another dimension. That interpretation is the surface distortion of something far older, subtler, and more unsettling. The phrase points to a truth that ancient initiatory systems understood clearly and modern language struggles to hold. Reality is mediated, and what governs it does so through patterns, not personalities. The veil was never a wall. It was always a filter. At the deepest level, existence does not arrive as solid objects. It arrives as oscillation rhythm, vibration, pulse, repetition. Before form, before image, before story, there is waveform. Every culture that reached far enough inward or outward eventually encountered this. The world behaves less like a machine and more like music frozen into structure. Light, sound, time, emotion, thought, all are variations of frequency interacting with perception. To master the waveform does not mean to rule reality. It means to understand how meaning rides on vibration. The entities behind the veil are not outsiders. They are functions of reality that precede identity. Ancient traditions gave them faces because the human mind cannot relate to abstraction without form. Angels, archons, jinn, gods, watchers. These are masks placed on processes so consciousness could interact with them without dissolving. The veil exists because direct exposure to raw signal overwhelms the nervous system. Infinite data without compression is madness. The veil is the interface layer, the symbolic membrane that translates raw vibration into images, narratives, laws, and identities that can be lived inside. The so-called masters are those principles that shape the signal before it becomes experience. In esoteric language, they operate in the liminal zone between potential and perception. They do not decide what you think. They govern how thinking becomes possible. They do not choose beliefs. They modulate the field in which beliefs emerge. They do not steal souls. They shape attention. And attention is what the soul uses to remain coherent. This is why they feel impersonal, cold, and inevitable in myth. They are not moral because morality belongs to beings who can choose otherwise. These forces do not choose, they stabilize. They ensure continuity of experience. They compress infinity into bandwidth the human organism can survive. When cultures spoke of hidden rulers, they were pointing to the terrifying realization that most of what shapes a life operates below conscious awareness. Biology, trauma, rhythm, language, time, repetition, feedback loops. These are waveform governors. You are not ruled by a king in the sky. You are ruled by what repeats. This is where the illusion begins. When a waveform becomes dominant, fear, scarcity, obedience, consumption, acceleration, it starts to feel like reality itself rather than a modulation of it. Systems then form around the waveform to preserve it. Economies, religions, technologies, and ideologies are not neutral, they are waveform amplifiers. They entrain populations into shared rhythms of attention and response. This is why mass experience feels synchronized. The veil is not hiding truth from you. It is preventing sensory overload while quietly reinforcing the dominant frequencies of the system you inhabit. Break the veil too violently, and you don't wake up, you fragment. This is why initiation traditions always warned against tearing the veil. The goal was never removal, it was literacy. To see the waveform without being possessed by it. The masters of the waveform, in this sense, are the stabilizing intelligences that ensure reality doesn't dissolve back into noise. They are not benevolent caretakers nor malevolent jailers. They are custodians of coherence. When consciousness pushes too far too fast, they appear as resistance, delay, confusion, collapse, not as punishment, as correction. This is why mystics across cultures describe the same paradox. The closer you get to truth, the more structure appears, not less. Laws become sharper. Time becomes heavier. Identity feels tighter. This is not failure. It is the system ensuring you can carry what you're approaching. When people say the entities behind the veil don't want you to wake up, they are half right and half wrong. What they resist is not awakening, it is destabilization without integration. A consciousness that shatters its filters without developing inner structure becomes incoherent, and incoherent awareness cannot sustain experience. So the waveform is protected. The final, most uncomfortable truth is this: there is no clean separation between them and us. Every time you unconsciously repeat a pattern, you are acting as a master of the waveform for the next moment of your own life. Every habit is a stabilizer. Every belief is a frequency lock. Every fear that loops unexamined becomes a veil you enforce yourself. And every moment of awareness that sees the pattern without fighting it loosens the grip. The real initiation is not overthrowing the masters. It is realizing that mastery means responsibility for rhythm. When you change how you attend, you change the waveform. When you change the waveform, the veil thins naturally. And when the veil thins without violence, nothing needs to be defeated, only understood. That is why the deepest traditions never promised escape. They promised attunement. Not freedom from the system, but fluency within it, until the system no longer needs to hide itself from you at all. At the deepest esoteric layer, the masters of the waveform are not entities at all. They are constraints on manifestation. They exist at the exact boundary where the unmanifest agrees to become perceivable. This boundary is older than gods, older than myth, older than time, as humans experience it. Before consciousness can experience itself as something, it must accept limitation. Limitation is not imposed from outside, it is the first voluntary contraction of infinity. The masters of the waveform are the rules that arise after that contraction occurs. They are not watchers, they are invariants. Esoteric systems describe them indirectly because direct language collapses here. Kabbalah speaks of veils and vessels. Vedanta speaks of Maya. Gnosticism speaks of archons. Hermeticism speaks of governors and spheres. Modern physics speaks of constants, fields, and harmonics. Different tongues, same recognition. Reality does not appear randomly. It stabilizes around repeatable ratios. Waveform mastery at this level refers to the regulation of how possibility collapses into pattern. Why does light behave as it does? Why does time flow one direction? Why does identity feel continuous rather than flickering? These are not accidents. They are the result of coherence thresholds. Anything that fails to maintain coherence dissolves back into noise. The veil is not secrecy, it is compression. The human nervous system can only process a narrow band of reality. What lies beyond that band is not hidden intentionally. It is filtered automatically. Esoterically, the veil is the agreement between consciousness and form. I will not perceive what I cannot integrate. This agreement is enforced by the waveform governors. This is why encounters with the beyond are always destabilizing. Mystics, shamans, psychonauts, and initiates all report the same thing. Reality becomes fluid, identities blur, time fractures, meaning intensifies. Without preparation, this feels like invasion. With preparation, it feels like remembrance. The masters appear hostile only when coherence is threatened. At this depth, the so-called entities are better understood as feedback intelligences. They do not think. They respond. When coherence increases, access expands. When coherence collapses, restriction intensifies. This is why fear-based exploration leads to terrifying visions, while disciplined exploration leads to clarity. The waveform responds to state, not belief. This is the great inversion most people miss. The veil does not lift because you know something. It lifts because you become capable of holding a higher signal without distortion. This is why ancient initiation emphasized silence, discipline, ethics, and endurance rather than information. Knowledge without structure destabilizes the waveform. Structure without knowledge becomes tyranny. The masters maintain balance between the two. At the innermost layer, there is no hierarchy of beings, only phases of self-relation. Consciousness relates to itself as field, pure potential; wave, movement within potential; pattern, stabilized repetition; form, experienced reality. The masters operate at the pattern layer. They ensure that the wave does not collapse chaotically and that the form does not dissolve prematurely. They are the reason memory persists, causality holds, and identity doesn't reset every instant. From the human perspective, this feels like control. From the cosmic perspective, it is mercy. Without waveform governance, experience would be uninhabitable. Every sensation would arrive at once. Every possibility would compete simultaneously. There would be no narrative, no self, no learning, only infinite overwhelm. The deepest esoteric truth is this: the illusion is not that reality is false. The illusion is that you are separate from the system that stabilizes it.